After the Battle of the Second Continent, I was sent back to spend some more time in the tank. Shit, I get hurt again, I might as well start growing gills. They submerged me in that sucker so much. But thankfully, they really took care of me. I was back on my feet in about 2 days. Thankfully for that, because as I was getting out of the tank, I was greeted with a surprise. I saw not one, but two of our angels standing there getting their armor on. I introduced myself after I, obviously put something on, and told them that I had been fighting with their sister. They asked me how she was doing, and I told them how concerned she was, but she focused on the battle itself, and that seemed to keep her mind occupied for a while. They began to get concerned with her mental welfare and decided they wanted to call her, but I insisted that they wait. I would take them directly to her, and I'm sure the look on her face would be something they would want to see. I still remember as they looked at each other and that little sly grin that women have when they know they're about to play just a little bit of a trick on their friends. I remember trying to keep things quiet was difficult. As we got onto a shuttle, thankfully my rank and position made it easier for me to actually keep everything on the down low. We insisted on going to the second continent. Even though the shuttle was supposed to be on one side, we insisted to be on the other, as we knew the invasion would be going across that very thin strip of ocean to finally take the last continent. We knew that we were almost within range of their ordnance, so the pilots were a little nervous. However, we did not get accosted the entire way down. We knew this meant either they were saving their ordnance or they weren't sure how to hit us from the direction we were coming at. I do give props to the pilots as they came down exceptionally fast and were able to keep everything together. As we landed, I saw the gates open, and I could see off in the distance, again looking across the ocean, that white hair, well, slightly blonde actually, waving in the wind. I looked over to our two angels behind me and I motioned to them, and I also motioned for them to stay quiet, as not only them, but a whole bunch of my men who had actually made it back and survived the last two battles came with us, and we walked up behind her. And I simply walked up, and I remember thinking, I swear if I get in that tank one more time, I'm going to be taller than her. Yet I tapped on her shoulder again. How's it going, Angel? She simply said, You have returned. Oh, I've returned all right. And I come bearing gifts. She looked a little confused and then looked at me for a moment, and I motioned behind her. She turned around and she saw her two sisters standing there, fully healed and in their armor. The look of elation on her face was something that is burned into my memory as she ran up, almost dropping her sword as she went to hug her sisters and welcome them back. I watched this, and many of my men actually started cheering and clapping. We have our angels back. And with our angels, there is nothing that can stop us from taking the rest of our sector back. It was only one continent, but it was the largest one, so it was going to take time. By now, the enemy had dug in. They knew that we could take 2 continents away from them, but we had lost many of our people, and they weren't sure when our attack would come. The angels insisted on going by themselves, but I looked them right in the eye, and so did one of the other commanders, and say, I don't think so. After all this, we're not losing any of you. I grabbed my angel by the arm and looked at her and whispered in her ear something just to make her blush a little bit. And I simply stated, I don't want you going by yourself. I'd hate for you to screw up that pretty face. She looked at me, and I swear, for a moment, she blushed. But it was enough to take her mind off the coming battle itself, And then we insisted that they go and catch up with each other and find out what was going on. I also made sure that my men brought as much food and water to them as possible, as I knew that our angel that had been fighting alongside had not stopped to eat. I started to wonder how she was still on her feet at all. And thankfully, within the next 30 minutes, I could see that she had finally relaxed enough to drift off into her meditative state. Most of us try to call it sleep, but it's not exactly sleep. Whatever they did to the angels, they don't sleep like we do anymore. It would be over a week before we were ready for the invasion, and this time the invasion would come from not just from one side, but from two at least, and we would squeeze the enemy into the center. And then once we got our heavy weapons close enough, we could begin to fire down and just pepper them as we went. However, we weren't sure how it was going to be. This was the last bastion that they had, and they would fight us for every square meter, every square centimeter of land that was there. It didn't matter if it was a millimeter. They would fight for it because they knew only one thing was going to happen if they lost. I dreaded this, and I begged the chain of command to rescind the order to kill all. I said, can't we at least take some prisoners? Because I was not one for genocide. And of course, I was very quickly shouted down, as many of the men and many of the leadership had lost family members to the Dark Hairs and would not, at any chance, give them the ability to survive after this. I knew it had to be done. I hated myself for it, but I knew it had to be done as I checked and rechecked my gear, made sure all the equipment was ready, everyone was ready, going down the chain of command, making sure that everyone knew they had to have everything ready. All the bolters were reloaded. I brought the satchel of fresh bolter cartridges to the angels myself. They gladly loaded their weapons, and I even had my subordinates bring up a few extra magazines for them. They looked at us strange, like, where the hell are we going to put these? But one of the men was actually very good at working with fabrics and leathers, and he had made extra bandoliers for them. Now they carried 3 times as much ammo as they had before. They even set it up so there was a belt system. That belt system made sure that no matter how much they moved, the bandoliers that strapped across their chest would not fly out and hit them. It would not get in their way. I'd have to make sure this man got a medal later for just being clever. When we were finally ready for the final assault, not everyone was all keen and ready to go, but we knew we had to get this last task done. As we got on our transports, we got ready for the lift. This time we wouldn't be going over via ship. Only a few people would, but they would be making room inside those vessels for our heavier weapon systems. We would have to go in, and this was going to be one hell of a hot drop. As we flew as fast as we could, as low as we possibly could across the ocean, I saw several pieces of ordnance go up. I knew these were potentially missiles, and we would totally be screwed if they hit us. At the speed we were going and as low as we were, there was not a chance in holy hell for us to recover before crashing into the ocean at what seemed like almost Mach 1.5. Yet we finally got there with minimal losses. I don't know what the hell was going up, nor did I give a crap. We would find out later that they were sending missiles to try and take our orbital ships down as they were moving across the planet. As we landed, once again, everything was a fury of flesh and steel, a maelstrom of fighting around us as any type of friendly and enemy began to mix together. You didn't know which way to turn. You were afraid to fire at points because you didn't want to go through the enemy and shoot one of your own. So it became a straight melee with handheld weapons. I holstered my weapon as I slung it across the back. I pulled both blades out, one in each hand, and I remember jumping on one of the Dark Hairs, climbing up the side, racking inside its ribs as I climbed up its body with my knives. It screamed in pain, lashed at me with one of its arms. I yanked out one of the knives and slashed at its arms, taking its hand clean off, and then continuing to go up till I hit its neck. At that point, the body just fell. I didn't have time to sit there and say, "Woohoo, look at what I just did." Instead, I simply turned to look at my next target, and screaming with a rage I didn't know I was holding in, I charged up. I could see 2 angels on my right, 1 angel on my left as they were crashing through the enemy. We ended up inside the city before long, and we had to go again door to door, room to room, building to building, block to block, as we continued to push through, our heavy weapons streaming over our heads as they crashed into the theater of war ahead of us, softening up the enemy, at least we hoped, before we got there. Even after a week, we were still trying to fight. Most of us had been exhausted so much that we had to stop and rest. Even our angels had to take some time, as the amount of dark hair that were there was simply staggering. How fast do these things repopulate? I had to try and figure out. But then again, we did call them demons for a reason. For all we knew, they produced by osmosis. After a night of barely any sleep, I still remember waking up. It was just about dawn, and went over to the sentries. The sentries were just as bad as I was, if not worse, as they had not had much sleep. I asked them if they had seen anything. "Nothing, sir. Nothing on the horizon. Nothing's moved. It's like they all scattered." I said, "Oh no, trust me. This is from an old war dog. Believe me, they're out there. They're probably watching us right now." Then, of course, one of them looked at me and said, "Shouldn't you get your head down then, sir?" "Yeah, you're probably right. I should leave." And I backed away. I let the company rest maybe a little longer than I should have. But then something happened we weren't expecting. It was like our own artillery was sent towards us, but it wasn't ours because ours was, well, bigger. But artillery began to fire over there, and we saw buildings begin to collapse onto our positions. We tried to hide. I kept telling everybody, "Find somewhere safe, push up against a building. It'll keep you from getting blown the hell up." It wasn't just me. Our NCOs were running around as well, forcing people down to make sure they didn't get hit. I saw a few of our own people getting blown up. One person direct hit. There was nothing left. Even the angels were not sure which way to turn. A bunch of our men had actually pushed them down and were using their own bodies to shield the angels. And then, to our absolute horror, one of these buildings, about 20 stories tall, just fell over and fell across the top of the angels. Many men saw this and ran over to try and protect them, but the rubble fell down, and everyone's heart sank. Oh, fuck, did we just lose our angels? I suddenly felt every emotion imaginable. It all blended together as I had gotten close to one of my angels. A little too close, maybe. And I looked over in the direction, and then something came up. An unadulterated rage. "You have just taken the one thing that is most precious to me. And now, I didn't have to say anything as screams of sheer rage came out from all around. I looked around. I raised my rifle way above my head. I looked to my left and right, and everyone was looking at each other. And I just motioned my hand forward, and we all began to charge. But as we did, we saw something amazing. A blue flash of light came from the building, and part of the rubble burst open, and the angels began to climb out. The angels rose from the ashes, from the rubble, and they were not alone, as they were followed by the men that had protected them. I ran over to my angel. "Are you all right?" She looked at me and she smiled. That vicious smile that I love so much. And I didn't have to say it loud, but I said it loud and proud. I just yelled, "Charge!" And we flew forward, the angels jumping over. It was like our angels flew past us towards the battle line. As we ran forward, rounds kept flying out from whatever type of weapons the Dark Hairs were using, but we didn't care. Through rage and fury, we fired our weapons into their line. We did not stop. We did not slow down, and eventually we crashed right into them. I used the blade at the end of my weapon to go right through the chest of one of them. He was a young male. It's a shame he gotta go down, pal, but as I twisted the bayonet to make sure his sternum cracked, I unfortunately found out my bayonet had actually snapped off. I looked at it and just said, "Well, shit," and kept going. The fighting through the trenches was hard. The fight through the buildings was hard enough, and even sometimes worse, as we had to keep looking up to make sure something wasn't thrown at us, something that was going to go boom. But eventually we got to the center, and as our angels again rised from the grass, and we saw them standing there defiant and unbelievably beautiful. We didn't know how they still had the will to fight, as most of us were so exhausted we could barely stay on our feet. But as we saw them charge, as we saw them rise into battle once again, I didn't have to say anything. Neither did anyone else, as we simply charged into the final fray. And by the end of the day, it was over. Steel had won the day. And while it was over, I sat down, still trying to catch my breath, as everyone else was trying to make sure they were still breathing. Medics moved around, making sure that everyone was okay. Most of the leadership was just trying to keep up on their feet, as we were having trouble keeping up with our angels. But we found out that the angels had reached their limit as well. My angel had dropped down to one knee and then eventually sat down against the side of a broken wall. I hobbled over next to her, sat down. "So, what's next?" She looked at me with a look of, "You gotta be kidding, right?" It's like, "So, you ever thought about, I don't know, losing the sword for a little while and just living?" She still didn't say anything, but I could see she knew where I was going. She then told me how she would have to return, her and her sisters, to serve the Emperor. And that was another time my heart sank. Unfortunately, my dear, that means something very bad for us. She asked me what, and I simply told her, if the Emperor's army is going to come here, then we would have to be gone. Her sister came over and asked why. I simply stated that we have been trying to live in peace. The only reason this war even happened is because you guys decided to go through the nebulas at the worst possible. There's only one way in and out of this sector that's not going to tear a ship apart and force you to crash land. I mean, has your Mechanicus not ever figured out how to check their sensors for that? It's pretty obvious. They all looked at me confused. One of my platoon sergeants came up and simply stated the same thing. He's like, "It's right there. You can't see it. It looks like a bunghole." The girls did not enjoy that joke, but being as tired as we were, we didn't really give a shit. However, I did see a bit of thought in my angel's eyes. She was contemplating putting down her sword. However, now I would just wait for her answer. If they wanted to leave, we weren't going to hold them. We would give them one of our less advanced shuttles to go back. But by the time they got here, we'd all be gone. We would have to blow up everything we ever built and start anew as we escaped into the void again. We told them this, as we did not want to serve anyone else and get brought into a war that just does not end. They all looked at us, and I swear, they all had that same look of contemplation. And I had only hoped, as I reached over and touched my angel's hand, that she would think, maybe there's something more to life than endless war. I was hoping that we could enjoy the moment more. I really was. But my dumbass passed out. I woke up with the angels sitting around watching. I apologized for falling asleep, and they said, don't worry about it. They were talking about what to do next, whether they should go, whether they should stay. And before I could say anything else, one of my female subordinates actually came up and added something to their conversation I was not expecting. Something that I had thought about myself, however, I didn't give it too much thought about that point. She simply reminded the angels that if they focus only on fighting, they are denying themselves something. They're never going to find balance in themselves if they do not understand that they're not just warriors. They're women too. If they deny who and what they are, they will never find balance in themselves ever, and it will actually get them killed eventually. I remember reading the old text from ancient times where, yes, warriors would focus on war so much that they lost themselves in it, that they could not break themselves away from the warfare no matter how hard they tried. And they could never find balance within themselves again because they kept denying who and what they are and who and what they were. Maybe I should spend some time on this reflection. And as I do, at least I can see my beautiful angel.